It's great to see you here for this June GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe, as we're going to be talking some more about the supporting releaser, equipping releaser, and how we see that playing out for people, how we coach people with those types of gifts. And let me just say a quick word of prayer, if I might, to get us started. Father, I thank you for the technology that allows us to be meeting together from many, many different places. And I thank you, Father, for the way you allow this to touch still other people who are not able to make this schedule, but they can look in on the recordings. And so would you give them a very special blessing today also, Father, as they follow along with our dialogue, and may they benefit from it in such a way, Father, that this will help us all to be better coaches as we help people to look at their GRIP-Birkman reports and to get the most that they possibly can out of it, for the purpose of building up unity in the body of Christ so that more people will know Jesus. Help us, Father, to stay focused on that today in our conversation so that you can receive glory because of it. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, hey, just diving into things, I hope that you were able to look at the article. And a couple of you folks were a part of a discussion about this in the GRIP-Birkman Coaches training just recently, as we always touch on this, and we had some really good discussions about this very subject of the difference between equipping releaser and supporting releaser. And the conversation came up again right after that training, and that's what led to this particular article showing up that came out in our newsletter. And it's also online. If you go to gripbirkman.com and you right now scroll down on the very landing page, down at the bottom there, you'll see, are you a releaser? That article, you can click on that for, then go to read more and see the entire article there on the website at gripbirkman.com. So I'll just kind of be referring back to some of the things that were said in that, but I do hope that this is not just going to be a one-way conversation, that it's going to be people participating as we think in terms of what have you seen in equipping releasers and supporting releasers? As a coach, how have you approached this particular bodybuilding role as you're helping people think in terms also of the integrity of the grip triangle? How this last piece, when we're talking about the bodybuilding roles, plays into their expression of their particular gift mix. And most particularly, when these body roles do show up, when a person comes up from their assessment and it says equipping releaser or supporting releaser, how do you coach them in terms of their ministry, their passion, their expression of how they are contributing to the body gaining fruit? So, just a quick reminder that this comes out of the 1 Peter 4:10 passage that talks about gifts in two general categories. This is not the only way that we categorize gifts. It is another way that we categorize the gifts. Verbal gifts or action gifts. As Peter wrote, each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks, as one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves, as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. So the verbal gifts are that whoever speaks. And we talk about the gifts that we include in that list, like preaching, sharing the word, evangelism, discipleship, pastoring, leading. This is the communicating of gifts through the gifts. It is involving equipping, training, educating. All of those things are part of what we call equipping gifts, using your words. And then as an equipping releaser, it's for the purpose of training others and then pushing them out, empowering them to lead or serve. And with that equipping releaser, we see that the power of the Spirit is at work through their words. And the other side of that, the new I say new, it's been a few years now since we added supporting releaser, but that is the newest of the bodybuilding roles that we have added into the mix, because several years ago, we realized that we had a lot of people who were really doing an excellent job of being behind the scenes and pushing people forward. And they had all of these supporting gifts, but somehow we weren't describing it well of what that function was that they were playing in the body. And we came up with the term supporting releaser. And those people are focused more on the action gifts. When we see that they're helping, giving, administering, providing resources for other people, they may be showing them mercy, but it's all in the background as they are more focused on the action, maybe even more on the physical needs of people, so that other people can be freed up to minister and serve. And that's where we see the power of the Spirit at work in those people through their actions as supporting releaser, as opposed to the equipping releaser who are seeing the power of the Spirit at work in them through their words to release other people. So with that little distinction, the description of the two releasers, I want to ask those of you that are here on the call, how have you seen this playing out in people? Where have you perhaps seen people that might have had some struggle with either of these as a predominant body role in their gift mix? And what are some of the tips maybe that you might have come up with to try and help coach people to see how they can better use this bodybuilding role in their team setting? So a lot of possibilities out there for you as we think about how are we coaching, equipping releasers and supporting releasers.
I don't know this is a solution, but it's an observation. As I've been sharing the leadership grip with pastors and groups of pastors, I think it's pretty easy for them to understand the idea that as pastors, one of our roles is to help people identify, develop, and then be deployed in the ministry. But my observation is, I don't think pastors really want to let go of someone they've invested in, because they might fly to a different nest. And that becomes a struggle for them to process that. It's an observation. I don't have a solution, but.
Yeah, Les, when we're looking at the liabilities on those bodybuilding roles, one of the liabilities that you mentioned there is it can be a holding on to people after they would be ready to fly on their own, not recognizing that they're really ready to move out, right? And that's, yeah, I think that's a very real danger that we might have, that fear of losing them if we release them, right? So how do you coach that pastor that you might, if this comes up in the conversation, how do you coach that pastor?
Well,
express that.
What I've tried to do is I've tried to help them think about what their function is. What are they doing as a pastor? What is their relationship with their congregation or this particular person we might be talking about? And hoping that as they unpack what their role in it is, they will actually get or remember that, oh, I'm to train them to do the work of the body, but they have to be let out of the pen to do that. And, if they get it, as opposed to me telling them, it's more likely to stick or work. So that's what I've been doing. Occasionally it does work, but other times I walk away going, ah.
What do you think it is that's holding him back, Les? The real reason that he's holding back?
They don't want to lose a good worker.
Yeah.
I mean, it's selfishness, really.
Yeah.
I've poured my life into this guy. he's my backup. He does this, he does that, she does this, she's responsible for that. I'm going to have to start over again if they go away. You know, and some of it might be micromanaging.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I let them go and do this, then it doesn't look like I'm doing everything anymore. I don't, you know, I'm not inside their heads. I know it goes around in my head as a pastor. So they could be playing with some of that. But.
Les, I was just kind of paying attention to the pronouns you were using. And there was a lot of singular personal pronoun in that. I, my, you know, how this is going to affect me. It really is focusing more on what I want to do and what I feel that I need to do and the help that I need from the way you were describing it.
Yeah, we miss we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the fundamental problem, Les, that you're talking about is that I think a lot of pastors struggle. It's not just the releasing side of it. It's developing the other individual, because in developing the other individual, you're actually releasing your hand on doing the ministry, because it's an empowering role. And I think that's often the conversation I have with pastors, because they're still, I'm the minister, I'm the one who does it. And they don't see themselves as a developer, as we would see in either the equipping releaser or the supporting releaser. They see themselves as the doer. And so the roadblocks actually, I think, even at further into the front end of this than we often think through, because they're just not interested in being out of light themselves.
And I think there's even maybe it's a parallel, but the feedback from the congregation at my last church, I've been where I am now for almost a year. My last church, we, and I say we because the church helped me do it, we trained and deployed 5 people into full-time ministry that left our congregation with their families. And each time that happened, we had a celebratory, what are you thinking about? You know, I said goodbye to these people in a church service because they were upset too, because they recognized that, hey, we just lost 5 people because Les released this guy to ministry. Or we lost 3 people because Les encouraged Sally to chase her dream and her husband went with her. You know, there's also that piece of it. And, you know, when you get to the 5th one in just a few short years, you've got a significant amount of weight that you're carrying, trying to help them trust God, that he knows what he's doing, because it's kingdom. That's a bigger we than just we in our little church. And, you know, I don't know if that fear hurts other pastors. Again, an observation.
I'm going to chime in here, and I have zero experience on this because I'm new, but I have to wonder if the person that you're mentoring and training and helping to equip, if his diamond meets your needs, does that make it even harder to let that person go?
Oh, I would bet it does.
Yeah. And, you know, Doug, unless something that's occurring to me as you're mentioning that, even if we're using the pronoun we, are we thinking about the pronoun we as being a little bit too small? When you mentioned, Les, that we're not just thinking about this little group of we, but we're thinking about the broader group, the groups of we. How do we get to that concept of being part of the broader kingdom and seeing what we're doing in that context, and not just in our little myopic view of where we are right now?
Yeah. I suppose if there was a way for us, for more of us, to see outside of my little circle. At my previous church, a young man, Jonathan, walked with me for a couple of years, finished up schooling. I signed off on him. He's now pastoring a church, but he left our church, and people were upset that Jonathan left. You know, why didn't we keep him? You know, someday we might need a new pastor, an associate or something. And I'm like, he has a larger role in the kingdom. He's not going to wait around here. Well, I have a guy coming to my office later today. He just took his first charge. He would not be there if Jonathan had stayed at our church, because Jonathan was in the next church and bumped him. And then he came back to me because Jonathan said, hey, you should go talk with Les because I'm here because of Les. And so we've got 3 churches now tied up because one church released somebody in the ministry. Now, Jonathan has been back to the original church and has told his story. So hopefully the new guy that's there and the people are being able to piece together the patchwork quilt of their being part of equipping this man to go into ministry, who was one that nudged somebody to get more training. And he's now going into ministry, actually starts the first Sunday of July. And how far does that snowball roll down the hill? And, you know, and it's part storytelling, but how do we help others see how big this thing is? This we, and maybe that would make it easier for us to equip and release.
Yeah, if I could jump in with a thought. In church where I used to work, we probably overstated it for effect, but we always said that ministry is not a job. Like, if you're doing ministry, you're not working, because ministry is the call of all Christians at all times. Now, paid staff's work was equipping the saints for ministry. And that's why we hired staff, not to do the work of Christ, but to equip others for the work of Christ. And then that included organizing, included mentoring leaders. It actually included preaching, because that's equipping the saints, even pastoral care, because for the same reasons, you're bringing folks, helping folks get healthy. Yeah, but to see that as the purpose of both just members in the church, but then also you're pretty, I think, radical approach, and was really good for us.
So Steve, what you're talking about there is the Ephesians 4:11-16 of
that's right. Yeah.
The purpose of those ministries, and all of those are equipping gifts, aren't they? They are all focused on the verbal part of building up the body of Christ for the ministry, as you say. And I agree with you. I think too many times we get the idea that the professional staff are supposed to be doing all of the work because they're the paid hands that have been hired to do this. And we need to go back and remember, no, the scriptural instruction is that they are supposed to be there for the purpose of equipping and pushing out the members to actually be about the ministry of the church. And I like what you say that we are all ministers in that sense, not just the professional staff people who are there to help us. Good word.
You know, Larry, I think this discussion is good. I might add something else to it that may be different from what we're saying. But I was rereading the article, and it's almost like it can be a conflict or at odds with one another. That in the manual, our coaching manual that we were each trained from, it basically says supporters must be free to support and not lead. And then, but in the article, I'm assuming you wrote it, you do a good job of balancing that out, but it still comes across as a conflict there that I think it has to do with how we define leadership.
Yeah.
And leadership is influence, simply defined. and some influence through their words. That's how we would define it when we train this in the manual of listen to my words if you want to see my equipping gifts, or watch my actions if you want to see my supporting gifts. So I think we oftentimes limit leadership to verbal leadership, and that's how we define it. But influence can be through service. And I'll try to make this quick. In our tribe and tradition, we have a very strong view of elder shepherding group that actually may lead and influence more than the pastor does. And so we have good men that are seen as great servants. They're the ones that are serving people behind the scenes, and they just love people, but they're doing the actions behind the scenes. And we think, hey, this guy will make a great shepherd. And we put him on the elder board, and all of a sudden there's different expectations for a shepherd or an elder in that fellowship, that all of a sudden they have to lead a meeting, they have to make announcements, they have to teach, and we just put them in a box that's not them. They're servant leaders in the truest sense, that they serve through their actions, not through their words. And so understanding that difference, I think, has been really significant for me to understand.
Jay, talking about that, when you've got a person with those supporting releaser gifts, who's going to be in the background, and I realized when I went back and read over the article myself and said, all right, there is a two sides to this coin, and it seems to be at odds with each other. It is, I think, I still think it is rare for us to see a strong leader who has all supporting gifts. But here's where the exception comes. Those people that are leading with all supporting gifts have someone else that they're depending on to do the equipping.
Yeah.
And when we're looking at it, like you mentioned there, when we're looking at it from more of a standpoint of the body and how is the body filling these functions, not just one individual, then that person is thrust out into the leadership role. I'll give you another example. Had a missionary that I was working with who was a very, very effective missionary and was a good discipler, a good leader of people, and was tapped for a leadership position in his organization. And he said, no, he did not want to be the leader because he really didn't want to have to do all the administrative stuff that the leader had to do. He wanted to be a frontliner. And he said, but I'll tell you what, you give me a young guy to be the team leader and I'll back him up in every way I can. And he wanted to be behind that guy. And he was more of a supporting releaser in terms of the kinds of gifts that he exercised with that particular young guy. And he did this more than once. And what he ended up being was a mentor for those young leaders, but he did it very much behind the scenes and very much more using supporting gifts than using equipping gifts in the way that he supported that guy. And then what would he do? The guy would say, hey, I really need some help with this. And instead of my friend showing him how to do it, he said, let's put you in touch with this other fellow over here who's a real good expert in this. So he was a resource person for him, but he didn't do the training or the equipping himself. He just put him in touch with those other people, freeing him up to be the leader. And like I say, he did this more than once. So in my estimation, I don't have his GRIP-Birkman in front of me, but in my estimation, he was exhibiting supporting releasing more than equipping releasing.
Cool.
And the functions were being filled in leadership.
Yeah, I think if we just make sharp definitions and divides that put people in a box, that's where we're making mistakes. I remember a long time ago reading this study before I knew the GRIP-Birkman, I used a disc that many are, and they thought, okay, let's find out what type makes the best leader. and they studied the Fortune 500 companies and CEOs. And you would think that the D, the dominant, in the red box, the doer, would be the best leader. But they found that there wasn't one leadership type. And the point was, you lead from who you are. You lead from how God has gifted you. And that's where you can, if you have all supporting gifts and God's gifting you there, you lead and influence from the supporting gifts. And so I think it really challenges our definition of leadership. And instead of using a business model leadership, we need to see there's great diversity in how God uses different leaders.
Yeah, and wouldn't Paul Ford say that leadership is not a person?
Yeah, rises from the team.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, Larry and Jay, does this conversation get more complicated when we look at the supporting releaser who assumes a significant leadership role because there are no functioning leaders?
Talk to us more about that, Les.
Well, you get in an environment, whether it's a church structure or a committee, and there is no identified or no surfaced leader, equipped, gifted leader. And because they're wired to serve, they step into that role to fill that hole. They now are leading, serving, but they're leading. And that complicates things because now everybody thinks, oh, we've got a leader. Well, what they really have is a ticking time bomb because they're now functioning out of a non-gift. So they haven't been made powerful there. So they're going to drain themselves if they're not careful, which creates a different set of problems down the road. And so as we're looking at, especially a group that's not even thinking about gifts, they're just thinking about we're a functioning thing, we're doing stuff, but we're not thinking about who should be doing what and why. This becomes, and again, I surface this because I've been called in to a church board that's kind of fallen apart because their leader fell apart. And, hey, I've got this tool, and we do the leadership grip, and we're sitting there and the guy's laying on his stretcher off to the side. He says, I know why I fell down, but that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
There's also another dimension here, I think, and that is that when the team doesn't have an equipping releaser, then if it's only led by a supporting releaser, I think the team becomes codependent and they end up not being able to function as independent people because, and part of it's the Western view of leadership. Well, the original conversation of why do we need a supporting releaser is because our Western worldview of leadership is that there's this person up front, waving the flag, leading us, but we have to think about leadership differently. But a team led by only a supporting releaser, unless I think you've nailed it there, is going to by definition be a team that's in atrophy, that has a hard time moving ahead because they're not being released.
Shannon, I'm going to put you on the spot because I think you've probably seen some examples of this in your years of your different careers.
Yeah, what I've seen with missionary personnel is that if you have someone who is a natural equipping releaser, but they're new in a culture or new in a team, oftentimes they get very frustrated because they can't be upfront. They don't have the skill set, whether it be linguistics or cultural understanding, or sometimes they are stuck behind a long tenured residential titled leader that won't release them to do something. So that's been probably the hardest thing I've seen is the very frustrated person who is that natural person who can train, who can prepare other people, who can speak into people's lives, but the opportunities are just not there. and there's either somebody standing in their way, or maybe they're just not up to being able to do it because of their cross-cultural situation right at that moment. And those people, if they don't get some swings in the batter's box and get to do a few things, they end up getting very quiet, withdrawn, and next thing you know, you're helping them pack up their suitcases and drive them to the airport. And that's very discouraging, because they had great gift sets. They were just not, they were being, I don't know, just held back without opportunity.
Wow. So, Shannon,
and I kind of wonder if that happens to coach staffs too. Somebody comes in looking to be encouraged and looks to be built up, and they're looking for maybe the lead pastor to create opportunities for them, and that's not happening. And so they themselves are going, man, I could actually lead this group, or I could do that, but I'm the new guy. I'm kind of waiting to be asked. Knowing our people and then empowering them is important.
Wow. And what that says to those of us who are entering the sage stage of life, of how, I have more than once encountered someone who said, well, these young whippersnappers stepped up out of turn because it was really my turn to be the leader, how do we balance that and still help those older people feel that they have something strong to contribute?
I'd like to kind of go back that question of having people that you equip and then you really do need to release them.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations that I got to listen in on with a person who was being observed during a coaching session, they asked the person who needed to be releasing someone to go forward and use their gifts. They just asked, well, who gave way, or who set you up so you got to use your gifts? And had them talk through that, and all of a sudden the light bulb went on that, oh man, I need to be just like that for this other person. Somebody did it for me. I've got to do the same. And when the light bulb came on, then it was just really easy to say, well, what will it take? How can you set them up? What box can you put them on to let them have a chance? And or what do you need to do to let them grow the next step? And it was really a nice conversation to get to observe, because I learned a lot, because I realized, oh my goodness, am I asking those questions of people I guide? Do I know that they have gifts that are lying dormant or they wish they could use? And am I even asking them that question? And it was a real eye opener for me to realize that that's the function of the titled responsible person, to go ahead and ask questions. Is there some gift you're not getting to use that you'd like to use? Or is there an activity you used to be a part of that you were really good at that you're not able to exercise now? Is there any way I could help you with that? And then just wait and see what comes out. And next thing you know, life starts breathing into this person who is frustrated.
I have another question that's kind of forming in my mind, because I'm thinking about the whole subject of burnout and how this can relate to helping people to prevent burnout. I'm wondering in my own mind, is there a greater tendency for any of these to burn themselves out because they're doing it all themselves? And I'm trying to think through, and it seems to me that the answer is no, there's not necessarily a greater tendency on one side or the other, because the person with all equipping gifts can still take it all on themselves and not be releasing other people to join them in the ministry. And the supporting releasing people, or that are supposed to be supporting releasing people that have all supporting gifts, could do the exact same thing by just doing it all themselves and never inviting someone else to come and join them and help with the task because they think they can do it better, or they just do it and don't even think about asking someone else. What do you think about that in terms of how it might relate to burnout and preventing it? Doug Horton, I see you smiling at that one. I assume you're not looking at pictures of your grandchildren.
No, I'm just wondering, it's who's going to be the first one to chime in because all the extroverts want to talk. So yeah, how to prevent burnout? I just think getting the right person in the right role, and I will admit I have taken on roles that are not in my gifting, they're not in my area of interest, and I just find it draining. And so, I enjoy doing the stuff that is along the lines of my gifting. It energizes me. So I totally relate to it. And I'm now at the point where it's easier for me to say no, that I have a little more wisdom. Because, way back when I was a new Christian and they couldn't get anybody, he goes, well, I can do that. Or sure, put me down.
You said you can say no now. What makes it easier to say no?
Just knowing partly knowing what I'm going to be good at, and partly knowing what's just going to drain me. There's some roles, like I did the adult fellowship, which was not something that gave me energy, and it was just difficult, and it was hard to get people motivated. And it eventually just kind of died out. There just wasn't enough interest to keep it going. I wasn't the right guy to be in charge of that thing.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. Whenever we're working out of our giftedness, or even if we're working in our giftedness, but we realize we're doing it because we can do it and we're doing it out of our own ability, we can be exercising what would seem to be our gift, our strength, and be doing it in the flesh, can't we?
I think there's a healthy way for an equipping releaser to use supporting releasers to train on the job training. Take somebody with you. Don't do anything alone that you can do with somebody else. They're not expending themselves as pretending they're an equipper or trying to be an equipper. They're just doing with the other. And some of it just rubs off. And I think that's one way we can help avoid burnout for the supporting releaser. And at the same time, allowing them to be part of creating the next generation. The other thing I think, and I think it's been sort of hinted at already, but it's the integrity of heart. I know who I am in Christ. I know what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm going to try not to be prideful. Maybe even my accountability people are going to help me say no to the stuff that I'm only saying yes to because it looks good for me. And I think there's a fear for pastors, and maybe it's fears for others who are employed, but there's always the fear of my paycheck. And, I actually told our bishop, the head of our denomination, I think everybody, before they go into pastoral ministry, should church plant for a couple of years. So they know what it's like to know you're not going to get paid, because that takes that fear away. But sometimes we make our decisions based on that fear. This could cost me my job, when we're really working for Jesus and he doesn't fire us that easily. I think there's some play there that we need to pay attention to. I think missionaries deal with the same thing. If I don't produce.
Steve says, when someone says that they lead by example, how does this fit a supporting releaser? And how might this be missing a full understanding of what a supporting releaser is or does? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Or Steve, you want to expand on that anymore?
Well, I hear people, describe themselves as lead by example. They tend to be people who, who don't want to be out in front, who don't like to talk much. And it's, in some ways, I see it as a rationale for not purposefully doing. They want to be so behind the scenes that sometimes, they're not seen at all. But they just want to be noticed by their actions. But even that time, even those can be very quiet and missed by people because they're not interacting with people. And so it seems to me that as we've talked about the supporting releaser, it kind of, seems to fit that I want to lead by example. But at the same time, a supporting releaser is really leaning into people. And sometimes people who, my observation of people who say they lead by example don't lean into people. They're just workers. And they would like people to watch that and work. They don't really interact with people.
Yeah, Les, you had a comment on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if they just are just doing. They're not really leading. It sounds better if I'm leading by example as opposed to I'm just doing things. And there's nothing wrong with just doing things if that's what you're called to do in that moment. And maybe it's just some clarity. Again, it's a hard issue. How am I presenting myself? Do I want to look like a leader or sound like a leader? Or do I just want to do the things that Christ has called me to do? So maybe they're not leading at all. So the wrong title for themselves.
So how might I go about when I hear that said, not saying that just, doing those things is the wrong thing to do, but either encourage what they are doing, the way they are living, or maybe if there is something that they can do to interact with people, how would I encourage that kind of interaction with people to become more of a supporting releaser, or if I see that in them?
I would applaud what they're doing. I mean, every entity's got people that no one notices until they don't do what they're doing. So figure out how to celebrate them, how to applaud that. And again, I would go back to that on-the-job training. Who could you take with you? Who's going to be the next generation? Who's going to help you when this gets too big for one person? And maybe even help them, introduce them to somebody. If they're that so disconnected from people or distanced from people, they don't even want to have that conversation. And maybe walk with them a little bit until they've kind of bonded enough where they're now doing this together. And what you're going to end up with at the end of the day are two people doing these amazing things that need to be celebrated.
And as these supporting releasers, Steve, go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, it reminds me, or I'm just curious, Steve, with somebody like what you're describing, I'd want to ask them, who has led you or influenced you in the past, and how did they do that?
Right.
And see what type of leader they would describe, and maybe multiple types of leaders. Did you have somebody who influenced you, but in a different way? That'd just be a curiosity question.
And keeping in mind why they are doing what they are doing. They're doing this in support for other people, to release them for ministry. And so you're doing this to help and support those other people. Are you the only person who can do that? Are you going to be able to do it forever? Who's going to do it when you're not there? Hey, if you burn yourself out, then what will they have? All kinds of questions like that to get them thinking in terms of, yeah, I do need to share this burden sometimes, don't I? I don't need to be the only one.
Yeah, those real quiet serving, supporting type people, it's often good if we can get them to write down what they do. It's you just don't realize all the little steps that have been in the process of the things they've handled until they're gone, and then trying to pick it up and run with it at the same efficiency or the same quality, it's almost impossible. But even if they just could say, could you like codify what you do? Could you walk me through this? I know you set up the sound system on Sunday morning, but walk me through it, and could you write it down so in case you're sick next Sunday, who else could do that? Yeah. And it's like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about it. But all of a sudden, then now you've got them a script and say, could you use this script if I brought someone else in and you could walk them through what you do? And it's something about putting it on paper. Now it's something you can teach. And for them, it's just in their head. They're just doing it. But maybe get that exercise of writing out, what is it you're doing? Now you've got a script that you can follow to equip another person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, similar to that, something that just came to my mind is y'all were offering different suggestions was asking what it is they want people to notice, not just what is their work, what is it they do, but I'm sure there's some kind of quality about that they would like people to notice, and they would like people to call that out, but no one's calling out because no one's really looking for that. And so I think that's another good question about what they really want people to notice about what they're doing. Yeah, those have all been good. Thanks for all that.
And Debbie, you had a comment too about, your comment really is related to multiplying one's ministry, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been thinking about the question that you asked about the older elder that thought he got bumped by the younger one that wants to lead. And I was just thinking, it's the multi-generational that I like to see in different organizations and even in the church, is that have the older come alongside the younger and, you know, help to equip them to lead later down the road. So like, you know, tell the older gentleman or lady, you know, hey, 6 months, why don't you lead this younger one in how to lead, since you've been with us for a longer time, and then allow that person at the 6 months to gradually walk into the leader role with the person that's been a part of the church longer, just walking along inside and giving them what they need so that they can actually lead better when they take over. And I think that would, I've never seen it done, but I think that would even help the older guy who thinks he's got jumped over to actually be a part of leading. And that's not only in the church, but I think that's also in the mission part. The burnout, I think it would help even to have the equipper or the both the supporting releaser and the equipping releaser to walk alongside those new folks that are coming in, and just say, hey, you know, 6 months down the road, if this is really what you want to do, is be the leader, I'll let you lead, but to walk alongside. And just get that. So the person that doesn't understand the culture can get the understanding behind the culture before they actually start to lead. I think that has helped tremendously, just what I have observed from being overseas quite a bit with the missionaries. Because when you're new, you don't understand all the cultures that's going on. And even, you know, bringing alongside like someone that's from the culture that you're serving in to understand that also. But that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and from a mission standpoint, some of you that have or are still serving in cross-cultural settings, I remember I had a colleague, we were talking about passing the baton and passing it on to our national partners that we were working with, training them up. And at one point he said these words, I think that a national ought to take over my job, and I think he ought to take it over the day after I retire. You know, and that was kind of the way he operated. Nobody else is going to do it. And how many times, I can't tell you how many times that I observed and heard, the reason we can't take this ministry on is because we can't do it the way you do it. We can't afford to do it the way you do it. We don't have the resources that you have. We don't have the training that you have. We don't have all this stuff that they don't have. And thinking in terms of supporting releasers and equipping releasers, helping those people to see God has given you everything that you need to do this, and we'll come along beside you, behind you, to help you to discover ways that you can use your gifts. And by gifts, I don't just mean the spiritual gifts, but the things that God has given you, every resource that God has given you to do this job. And we will help you to discover how He wants to use you so that you can be good stewards of the task that He has given you. And that's a really hard one, because it's, our identity gets so tied up in our work. And God intended for us to work. He told the man in the garden, in the Garden of Eden from the very beginning, He gave him tasks to do. Yes, we want to work, but that's not where our identity is. So yeah, I think you've really latched on something important there, Diddy.
Well, I'm still, my head's been wrapping around the burnout question, yeah. Because I think it's an interesting, I think there's a double-edged sword on both sides of it. So if you're equipping releaser and your activity is not resulting in releasing, then there's a burnout threat for you, but there's a serious frustration threat for the people that you've been investing in. Mm. And then if you're a supporting releaser, again, the same thing happens. If there's no releasing attached to it, then the burnout risk is for you, but the codependency that Ken talked about becomes the functional threat, right? So you've got, on both sides of it, you've got negative connotations if the releasing isn't happening. And I think that becomes the active word, right? And then the other thought that's been rattling around in my head is just, like, we see this as a biblical mandate, but I think we also recognize that right now the stakes are higher because it's a generational mandate. There's all these transitions that are happening right now because you have an older generation that have been entrenched and actively engaged in these roles for decades and are now coming to the end of that run. And so I think the stakes are actually always high, but I think right now they're higher because there's going to be this massive transition that's going to be taking place over the next 5 to 10 years. And if we don't see the value of this in that, then we're going to have what happened in your situation, Larry, where, oh yeah, they can look after it when I retire. Well, that's actually not going to be the best way to pass that baton, right? So just a couple of thoughts.
Les, I've been thinking about the burnout also. And if you back up and look at the team styles, I think having that let's be careful person use their gifts and be looking at our quality and speaking truth at us and saying, okay, who's at red line? Okay, who's sitting in neutral? Come on, let's, doing that assessment. Who's been in leadership and homesteading? Let's be careful not to just let someone homestead, or that person who's willing to ask those questions to challenge our quality of what we're producing, and then being able to speak truth to us about it. That could be a real helpful person to provide some analysis to get us from either releasing so many people so quickly that we're just overrun, or we're not willing to release anybody and we're hoarding, either way. But that let's be careful person can be that monitor that's looking at everything and then can provide that really good feedback to, assess and even maybe advise. So
yeah, that's good.
Maybe backing up the team style, look for that person to say, hey, what are you seeing? Talk to us.
Yeah, Shannon, I think with that, you've reminded us of something very important in all of our coaching, and that is to constantly be asking people, who do you need? Who do you need? And I like when we're doing a team build to not just do the generic, oh, I need an active listener. If there's someone in the room that is an active listener and that's who you need, I like to get the people on the team looking to that person and saying, hey, Jay, I need you because you are an active listener, and here's the reason I need an active listener. And when they start doing that and realizing, yeah, it solidifies for them more of who do you go to when you do have that need, and can you go to them with that need and even know what the need is to ask them. And sometimes I might even say, I'm not exactly what I need, but I know that you're the guy that I need to come to help me out with this. Because as my now emeritus pastor often has said and continues to say, we need Jesus and we need each other, don't we? That is what this is about. Hey, folks, I hate to cut it off, but I thought we would probably run this conversation for about 30 minutes and then get to some other things, but the conversation has been rich. I hope it has been helpful to you, not just thinking about supporting releasers and equipping releasers, but just thinking more in terms of how do we coach people in that team setting to be all that they are supposed to be in Christ so that he can do everything he wants to do through them. And as we work that way in the body of Christ, helping people to really build that unity that we're after so that more people will know Jesus. So thank you for being with us once again, and we hope to see you again next month. God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Larry.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.